Welcome to this Killick Explains video on the something for me number, as I call it. Sounds a bit selfish. What are you talking about? Well, this originates from a chat I had recently with 4 friends in the pub. All of them are successful, ambitious and relatively well off, and they're all also worried. And basically what we were talking about, admittedly after a pint of beer, was what is their something for me number. And the something for me number is basically the minimum amount they need to net or clear each month after tax before they get something for me, whether that's a pint of beer, a packet of crisps, or whatever it happens to be. So it represents the amount of money they need to earn, which is, if you like, committed and sunk every month before they actually start to enjoy themselves. Now, what was worrying them was the sheer size of that number. And this makes the point that seemingly well-off successful people can get themselves into financial trouble. So let's look at some of the key components of that minimum net income amount, that something for me number. All right, because every pound beyond that is a pound you get to spend on yourself. Well, the key components include a mortgage, and interest rates are rising at the moment, household bills, and we all know that energy costs and all sorts of other costs are rising at the moment. School fees in 2 out of the 4 cases, private school fees, that's a big chunk, also rising at the moment. Travel costs and food. Now, you might say there are some others, all right, but those are significant, chunky outgoings. And this is the point, the something for me number is what is left once you've covered all of that out of either 1 or 2 incomes, depending on the type of household you're in. Now, what are the problems? Problems are several-fold. Number 1, all of those costs I mentioned are rising, and in some cases pretty fast. They're all need-to-haves. You can't stop paying the mortgage, despite protesters suggesting otherwise. You can't just not pay energy bills, all right? You can't just not go to work. So they're what I call need-to-haves, and of course, salaries are highly unlikely to be keeping up. Goldman Sachs have forecast that UK inflation, in a headline-grabbing move, could hit 22% next year. How many people do you know that are getting pay rises after tax of 22%? I suggest the answer is not many. So this means that even successful people on paper, sitting what looks like comfortably in the pub, can be underwater financially. All right? In other words, they can be getting themselves into financial trouble because although they've got a seemingly high income, all those costs I mentioned are eating away at it progressively. So what to do? All right? What are we going to do about this problem? Now, I didn't have all of this conversation in the pub. We moved on to other things like sport, for example, but I would suggest there are a few things we can do. Number 1, know the number. Might be a bit of a depressing exercise, but sit down and work out what is my something for me number. Number 2, discuss it. All right, these things are better shared. And I'm not saying you need to share that with your mates. It might be a number you'd rather not share with everybody, but discuss it with a spouse, discuss it with family, discuss it with close friends. Because if nothing else, it makes you realise other people might be in the same boat and you might be able to come up with a solution. And then, of course, try and reduce costs where possible. This is not a year to be complacent. It's a year to try and do something about it. So what can we do? And here are a few hints and tips. All right, there's a lot more to know. I'll give you some sources at the end. So mortgages, first of all. Make sure you know what type of mortgage you have, what type you might move to next. Are you the kind of person that would be more comfortable with a fixed interest rate, for example? Are you the kind of person that is more comfortable taking a punt, as it were, on a variable interest rate? Could you look at an offset mortgage where your income and your debt are netted off to work out the amount of interest you pay? Look at the length of it. For example, does it make sense to lock in to a longer fixed term period for that certainty around your sleeping well at night, as I call it? And of course, review the rate. Okay, so make sure you're on top of when your current deal expires. You don't want to go onto a standard variable rate by mistake. Make sure you're organised. So type, length and rate, all things to look at and discuss in relation to your mortgage. Bills. Now, there's only so much you can do about mounting energy bills, but at least forecast them. I'm making this video at the end of a very warm summer in 2022, but in 6 months' time it'll be winter, and suddenly energy bills will spiral out of control for some people. So make sure you're on top of how big your bill could get, where is the cap set, for example, and try and shop around as much as possible. Difficult to do in some cases for energy bills right now, but other utilities certainly. And a video I mentioned before, turn off some of those subscriptions that you're not necessarily using. School fees, school fees, private school fees, key questions to ask. When will they kick in? You know that because once a child is born, you know when it's going to hit the ages of 8, 11 or 13, which are all relevant ages for private school fees for reasons I cover elsewhere and in my How to Save, Plan and Invest for a Family guide, for those people wondering. Where will your kids go to school? Do they have to go to a private school? Is there a state school alternative? Could you move somewhere to reduce that enormous outgoing in some cases, which is private school fees? What support is available? Some of those friends I was talking to in the pub, that they've managed to get sponsorships, scholarships, bursaries to help with some, at least, of the cost of private school fees. And what about payment plans? Is there an option to pay school fees up front, for example, and achieve some kind of discount via the school? All these things well worth discussing in advance. Travel costs. A lot of people have been saying it's brilliant. I do this hybrid working thing. I work from home. Sometimes I go to the office. This winter might test that because after all, let's be honest, if you're in the office, your heating isn't probably on at home all day. Your employer is covering your heating bills. And I think some people will need to look at the balance. They'll need to look at the expense of travelling versus that potentially big benefit. And, are there ways to save money? Could you walk a bit of the journey, for example? Are there ways to alternate the route? So all of these things are worth weighing up because getting to work is quite a big cost for a lot of people. And then food costs. Simple things like, shop more cheaply. Do you need to buy from Ocado? Could you go to Lidl? It's a bit of a brutal choice there, but it's worth looking at these things. And when you shop, are you buying in-house or branded products? I'm probably teaching people to suck eggs at this point, but those are the things you may not have bothered to have a look at before, but I would suggest are possibly well worth looking at right now. In short then, what I'm suggesting is we all start budgeting, basically. And if you'd like to know more about how to reduce some of those costs I've mentioned, how to get started on budgeting, well, a good guide to ask me for would be How to Save, Plan, Invest for Your Family, editor@killick.com for that guide, and any of my other how-to guides. If you'd like to read all about it in confidence from our wealth planners, for example, who cover these sorts of topics from time to time, then it's editor@killick.com. And if you'd like to watch videos on some of the jargon I've been using throughout this one, then killick.com/learn gets you into our library.